When I was a kid, I lived in a haunted house. I know how that sounds, and I don't want to sound pedantic, but I lived in an actual haunted house. It was never anything sinister throughout most of my childhood. You would see things out of the corner of your eye. You'd come downstairs and find things moved a little. My mom even had her hair pulled in the bathtub once, but it was an isolated incident that never happened again. Things moved downstairs, you'd hear weird noises, sometimes you'd hear voices, but it never went beyond that. It was annoying sometimes, but I never really felt threatened. It was just something that happened. Until my parents decided to sell the house. I was about 18 or 19 years old, and I'd just dropped out of college. Medical hadn't been for me, and I was just really burnt out and kind of lost. I had been writing since I was 8, but I hadn't discovered horror yet, and was still trying to hash out something in the fantasy trade. I had a job, and I had my parents' house to fall back on, at least until they informed me that they were moving 2 states away. They didn't have it all set up yet, but my parents were doing well enough that they could afford to go ahead and pick up another house to flip, while they were still trying to sell this one. They offered me a pretty sweet deal. Stay at the house and watch the dogs while they went and got the house ready to move. They'd be back in about 2 to 3 months after they had everything ready, and then they'd start moving everything up there officially. If they hadn't sold the house by then, I was more than welcome to stay and keep living in it for a while. This turned out to be moot since I didn't stay in the house longer than about a month. It started out with little things. Things were always going missing in the house. Car keys, coffee cups, and books, but now they were nowhere to be found. I lost my car keys 3 different times in that month, and each time I had to go to the dealership and get a new one made, to the tune of about $50. My school textbooks that I was getting ready to sell to a classmate also went missing, as did my Game Boy and a bill that I'd been planning on paying to keep myself out of debt. That's just the stuff I can remember, but it was a constant struggle, waking up and wondering what was going to be missing. The dogs also got very nervous in the house. My parents kept border collies, 2 of them, and they'd always been welcome in the house, along with the other menagerie of animals that my mother kept. They'd never been uncomfortable coming in and out before, but now they seemed to want to live on the back porch rather than in the house. The Florida heat is no joke, and when a dog with long hair would rather sleep in the non-air-conditioned back porch than inside, you know something's going on. I just chalked it up to them missing my parents, but I had no idea that it was about to start rattling up. That was about the time I started noticing the shadows. I slept upstairs more than downstairs, feeling safer upstairs, in case someone decided to break into the house. We had neighbors who were less than reputable, and our house had been broken into while we were on vacation before. I figured that if someone broke in, being upstairs would give me more time to get my gun ready and call the police. But the real problem was already inside the house. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, awoken by a sound or by a feeling, and see something moving in the room. Not really moving, I guess. I'd see the shadows on the wall as they walked behind me or around the bed. I'd turn my head to confront them, but there would never be anybody there. The room was always empty, and a search of the house would prove that no one was in there. What's more, even though they were on the back porch, I knew the dogs would pitch a fit if they smelled someone in the house. They might not have liked being in there, but they didn't like anybody being in there unless they knew them. I tried sleeping on the couch, but it was the same problem. I'd hear whispery voices, see big long shadows up the wall, and when I turned over to confront them, they'd be gone. Sometimes I'd hear things moving if I slept downstairs, so I always made a habit of sleeping upstairs. Most nights I tried to have friends over, people to watch movies with, or people to keep me company while I was at home. But most every night I wound up staying there by myself. I'd stay at friends' houses sometimes, but never for very long. I had responsibilities at home, and none of their parents were ready for a long-term house guest. I should have left after the shower incident, but I managed to talk myself out of it. I really wanted to believe I had just scratched myself on something, No one wants to believe their childhood house is actually haunted by hateful spirits. I was in the shower about 3 weeks after they left. I was getting ready for work, soap in my hair, soap in my eyes, when suddenly something scratched my shoulder. I opened my eyes and immediately regretted it, but I started looking around to see if one of the cats had scratched me, or if I had run up on a hook or something. Mom had little hooks on the wall for loofahs and things, but they had already been taken down. I didn't see any cats or anything in the bathroom, and I went back to cleaning the soap off myself before inspecting the scratch. It was from my shoulder blade to my mid-back, and it looked like 3 long scratches that looked a little infected. I put ointment on them and put a big Band-Aid over them. Mom was a nurse, and she had a lot of stuff like that in the craft room, and tried to ignore it. It was just an accident after all. These things happened. So I fed the dogs and went to work as I always had. When I got home that night, that's when the weirdness really hit a fever pitch. The second I came in the door, it was around midnight, I could swear I heard people upstairs. It sounded like 4 or 5 of them moving around on the 2nd story. I grabbed my dad's gun that he kept by the TV stand and headed upstairs to have a look. I hadn't seen any signs of a break-in, no broken windows or open doors, and I wondered how they'd gotten in without being seen. My parents had a big house, but most of the easiest ways to get in were through the living room. Unless these guys broke into a back room, I didn't figure they could have gotten in without me noticing. I came up the stairs, Beryl leading the way, but as I swooped into the big front room where my parents slept, there was no one there. I searched the house, upstairs and downstairs, but I found nothing. It was as if I had imagined the whole thing. The dogs sleeping peacefully on the back porch led me to believe that I was getting jumpy, and as I got ready for bed, I couldn't help but listen out to make sure that it wasn't just my nerves. That was when something kicked the door in, and I jumped about a foot. I was washing my face in the sink, and I winced as the soap came into my eyes again. I came downstairs several at a time, the gun back out front to find the front door open, and no one there. I'd expected to hear footsteps as I came down the stairs, maybe even people running, but there was no one. It was an empty house with nothing in it. I made another pass at the house, but still found nothing. I was getting jumpy, really not liking what was going on here, and it was getting hard to get ready for bed. I brought the dogs back inside, little as they wanted to come in, and I tried to coax them upstairs so I could feel like I had a little company. I had known these dogs all their life. I helped my mom raise them from puppies, and it was the first time I had heard them growl at me as they stoically refused to go upstairs. They didn't snap, but I got the feeling that if I pressed the matter much, they might. I finally left them downstairs, deciding to close my bedroom door and get some rest. I put a chair under the front door as well. No sense waking up to it slamming open again if I could help it. I managed to get to sleep after some unsuccessful tossing, but when I did, it was short-lived. In my dreams, there were people standing around me, whispering. I didn't know who they were. They were people I'd never met, and when I rolled over to look at them, they had no faces. They were made of shadows, and I got the feeling they were talking about me. I can't explain why. There's no reason I have to feel that way. But suddenly, I knew that I was the subject of their conversation. I rolled over in my dream, not wanting to look at them, and that's when I saw the shadows riding up the wall. They danced and capered across the flat eggshell paint, and I realized I wasn't sleeping anymore. I could feel eyes on my back as I shivered under the covers, and the more awake I came, the more I realized I could still hear the whispered voices. These were the things that I'd been seeing when I tried to go to sleep every night, and as I came awake, I found that the shadows were still there. They were rising up the wall, 7 or 8 feet tall, and their legs stretched out behind them grotesquely. I don't know what they were saying, but I didn't like it. It was something like muttering, a constant flow of low talk, and when I turned to look at them, they didn't disappear this time. I couldn't see them, not really. no more than I believe they could see me. But I knew that they were looking at me. I was filled with the most profound terror I've ever experienced. I didn't know what to do. Did I stay? Did I go? This was my home. I had always felt welcome there, and this was the first time I had ever felt unease in the house. In the end, I chose not to confront them. I rolled out of bed as quick as I could and ran for the door. The dogs looked at me like I was crazy as I went downstairs, but I didn't really care. I was not staying in that house for another minute. I went to my car, opened the door, but remembered that I'd left my keys inside. I looked back at the house, but the thought of going back in there made my knees weak. There was no astral lights in the windows. There were no weird figures looking down at me. But suddenly looking at that dark house by night made me never want to go back in there again. I slept in my car till morning, and after the sun came up, I went to get my keys and a few things. I called a friend of mine and asked if I could spend the night at his place indefinitely, and after telling him what I had experienced, he agreed. I don't think he believed me, but I think he believed I'd seen something. His mom was the kind of person that believed in most anything, and when I told her, she insisted that I come stay. I stayed at his house until my parents sold the place, and then I went to live with my grandma until I got a place of my own. I thought I might be done with the weirdness in the house, but it had one last surprise for me. I went back a few weeks later to help them move some of their things onto the truck, and when we lifted the sectional, I found something I'd been looking for. Underneath the couch was everything I'd been missing, stacked in a neat pile and just waiting to be discovered. My dad laughed about it, saying I must be kind of scatterbrained, but I knew I'd checked under the couch many times. I helped them move their stuff on the truck, but insisted on being gone before dark. They thought I was being silly, but I never came back there again after dusk. When they sold the house a few months later, I got my stuff out and never came back. My mom got into ghost tours and things later in life, and did some research on the place after I told her about my experience. She was almost giddy when she told me about the checkered past of the house we'd lived in. Several people had died in that house, and not all of them of natural causes. There were rumors that 2 brothers had had a duel in the backyard, and one of them was still buried on the property. A boy drowned in the pond that sits at the corner of our land. Several people died of natural causes in the house, and whether or not they're the ones who haunt the house, I don't know. I find sometimes in my life that strange things seem to follow me. They seek me out sometimes, and I think that might have been part of the reason I started writing horror. The closer I get to understanding it, the more I know I'll understand my reasons behind it. And that's not the only strange thing that's ever happened to me. Perhaps I'll tell you about a few others sometime, if you like. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet for being our spooky skeleton tier contributor. And thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I think you'll find one that'll suit you best. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.